Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Mount Zion Church of Christ for a period of Bible study tonight. We again are grateful that you are here, and we are thankful as a church family that we have had time to get back together and be able to meet in person the last few weeks. And this past Sunday was the third Sunday that we have met in person, and it's just encouraging to be able to see faces that we love again, and our attendance has been going up as more and more people are getting out and being a part of the worship in person, and we're grateful for that. But of course we are taking precautions to stay safe, and we're looking to God to keep us safe, and just hope that we can all be together soon, like we used to be. Tonight we are going to be in the book of John. We're going to be in John chapter 15. The last two Wednesday nights we've been in Numbers, and for those of us who are reading through the Bible over the next 3 years, that's kind of where our readings have been in Numbers, so that's why we've been doing some lessons from there. But tonight we're going to skip over to the New Testament, and again, encourage you to flip to John chapter 15. And it's here that Jesus has met with his disciples in the period of the Last Supper, right before he is arrested and is going to be tried and crucified. And he is just meeting with them to talk about some last minute things about the kingdom, and just giving them some instructions on what they need to do after he leaves. And it's here in John chapter 15, he talks about this concept of the vine. And we are in a period of time. A lot of people are getting outside, have been getting outside for a while with the warmer weather, and people are gardening and doing things like that. So I think this message really fits tonight and just helps connect maybe for some of us in some of the things that we are doing right now outside. So again, I encourage you to turn to John 15. We're going to start in verse 1. It's here that Jesus says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener." So we're going to stop there. And, it is important for us to recognize that Jesus is the vine. This is an illustration that, again, he's given to his disciples. And of course, it's an illustration for us. And he is telling us that he is the vine in this illustration, and God is the gardener. And of course, when we think about a vine, it's the source of life. It's where the branches get their nutrition. It's how they stay alive. It's how they're fed. And of course, that makes all sense when we think about Jesus being the vine, and we think about followers of Christ being branches. We are fed through Jesus. He is our life support, and it makes a lot of sense as he talks about this in the first verse. And of course, God is in control. He's the gardener. He has authority to do as he wishes, because God the Father, he created everything that we see. He created us, and he has the right to do as he wishes. In verse 2, it gives us this illustration of what God has the right to do. It says, "He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful." So Jesus really is trying to get across to his disciples that he wants them to be followers who bear fruit. And of course, that can mean making other disciples, spreading the gospel, speaking good words, speaking encouragement to others. And it, of course, can mean just bearing fruit in our own daily lives, in our walk with God. I think about the fruits of the Spirit, developing patience and joy and things of that nature. Those are ways that we can bear fruit in our individual spiritual lives as well. But God, again, he has the ability to cut off branches, and he has the ability to prune branches. And when we when people make the decision to follow Christ, God grafts them to the vine. He grafts them into Jesus. And if you don't know what grafting is, I encourage you to maybe check out a YouTube video to see what that concept is. But in verse 2, it talks about how God, he cuts off every branch that does not bear fruit. And it says that he prunes those who are bearing fruit so that they can bear even more fruit. And, again, when we make that decision to follow Christ, God grafts us into him. And, just because we've been grafted into Christ doesn't mean we don't have work to do. If we're lazy, if we're complacent, if we're not committed to, that relationship with Jesus, God has every right to cut us off from the vine, and he does that. And it also talks about how he prunes, and pruning is something that is, I would imagine that it hurts, and it's just cutting back growth, but the purpose of that is so that the plant can grow and produce even more. And, we've been in a recent season of life where in some ways we've been pruned in a lot of ways. We've been maybe cut off from some distractions that weren't producing good things for us spiritually, perhaps. And so as we think about those things that maybe have been pruned from our lives, let's not be tempted to rush back into those. That may be God trying to tell us that those things were distractions, and those things were things that were getting in the way of our spiritual growth. And God wants us to bear fruit for him. He wants us to bear fruit in our, individual spiritual lives. So that's his purpose in pruning. In verse 3, it says, "You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you." Verse 4, it says, "Remain in me, and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me." So again, it's important for us to understand that separate from Christ, we are essentially nothing. We get our life support, we get our food from the vine, and again, that's Jesus. So we have to remain in him if we're going to bear fruit and do good things for God and grow in our spiritual walks. Verse 5, it says, "I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." So again, it's kind of continuing to state the same things as it's been stating in the previous verses. But again, followers of Christ are the branches, and we are grafted on to the vine when we make that decision to follow him. Verse 6 says, "If anyone does not remain in me, he is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned." That's really serious language there. It's just, God really trying to speak to us about the importance of remaining in the vine. And, as we as a church seek to grow and honor and worship God in all the ways that he desires, it can be discouraging sometimes when we see those branches that we once knew were alive and part of the church and a part of the vine, when we look around and see them severed and separated and withering. And we just bear such an important task of encouraging those who are around us, those who may be struggling. Verse 7 says, "If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be given to you." And here we may be tempted to think that God will just give us whatever we ask, and all we have to do is be faithful to him and remain in him, and he's going to do what we want him to do. And if you've been a follower of Christ very long, you just know that that's not necessarily how God works. God is faithful to provide, He's faithful to deliver, but God also has plans. He also knows what's best for us, and He is faithful to provide those basic needs that we desire, the food, the clothing, the jobs, things of that nature. Maybe we desire abilities and talents, and He will deliver in those things, but He's not just about providing for selfish motives that we are sometimes tempted to have. So when we read those verses, let's not get confused on what God and what Jesus is trying to tell us here about asking whatever we wish and receiving it. If it's going to bring glory to God and be for His purpose, God is going to provide. But if it's for selfish desires, let's not be so sure that that's going to be delivered. Verse 8, it says, "This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples." When we think about the concept of bearing fruit, again, just making disciples, encouraging others, just all the different ways that we can bear fruit as a whole, as a group, and then all the ways that we can bear fruit individually. The purpose of us doing those things, it tells us in verse 8, is for the glory of God. It's not, for our own pleasure. We do get pleasure and happiness out of bearing fruit, but ultimately we do those things for the glory of God. I know in some of these lessons over the past several weeks, I've talked about the retreat, the fall youth retreat we went on. I think it was back in 2017. The theme was, it's not about me, it's about Him. And that same concept applies here when we think about bearing fruit. Again, it's for the glory of God and not our own. Again, we thank you for joining us tonight. I just wanted to take a few short minutes to read through those first 8 verses. I do encourage you to maybe read them more in depth and just think about what Jesus is trying to tell us in regards to bearing fruit. And I hope as a faith family that we think about ways that we can bear fruit as a church, ways that we can encourage one another as a church, and also ways that we can bear fruit in our individual spiritual lives. This is an important illustration, and one that Jesus, again, wanted to tell His disciples right before He was crucified, and it's an important message for us today. Look forward to seeing many of you on Sunday, and just hope that you have a great rest of the week.